recognition, for protection, for advanced content controls, and so on. The second part is the cloud part, where it's integrated in NSP cloud, and basically this whole hardcore logic lies out there. So, for example, whether the extracted SNI from agent is legit to be visited or not, or whether it is malicious or something like that, or what was the device that was connected to the network. So that's this big cloud, and then on the upper right, you see the smaller sort of cloud. So that's independent from any NSP, and that's where this very top line says threat intelligence, and I will be talking basically about this, this line and what was the story and sort of what's continuing in there. So at the moment that I'm talking, there is approximately more than 2 billion devices connected, and the main coverage area for this service, for these NSPs, are North America. So I won't provide any hints, but probably you can guess what I'm talking about, and that's approximately 50 million gateways. So that's just setting the stage and to try and make you imagine what kind of scale we are talking about. This is the freshest data. So also the household is one of the residential household is kind of interesting in that sense that there are no definition on how things should be done, what is allowed and what is not, apart from the most obvious cases. The most obvious being, yes, known botnet command control centers, and for example, phishing, malware downloaders, and so on. But apart from that, so throughout the years, there's been around, more than 45,000 different distinct, device models that were discovered during deployment and overall adaptation of the service. So, and this is the latest data. Research how certain device types has grown in 22 and past of 23. So there is one device type missing from here that has almost doubled in 22. So maybe someone's up for a guess what that device type could be. That's kitchen appliances. Honestly, that is, I don't know how to explain that, what's cooking, why this sort of was so popular in 2022, and we've seen in summer, suddenly, end of summer, kitchen appliances growing, amount of kitchen appliances growing, and it's doubled when compared to 22 and part of 22 data. So from this top, what's this top 8? So definitely kitchen appliances are not the leading ones when we talk about protection. So there are not that many attempts to, let's say, to exploit kitchen appliances when compared, for example, to cameras and NAS devices. These are the ones when talking about IoT that are the most, let's say, the most vulnerable and the most attractive to external entities. So, but the story or the timeline behind this talk, is that first step when building the threat intel capabilities is, I think, the obvious one, and that's where usually, companies go, and that seems like the best one. So to buy the best, to test the best, and to find the best for your use case, and then use it. And forget everything about the protection, threat intel, and that's it, to allow some other entity, some other company take care of all that, all that's out there, and take care of, let's say, other researches and other challenges sitting on a network layer. But it became clear at some point that this is not enough. So sort of be it the best single vendor, and if we even talk about, such industry area or such area as residential homes that do not require any very strict policies, and strict policies cannot even be applied there, nevertheless, so a single vendor is far too little to have coverage, and there are gaps. So the next step is, okay, if one is not enough, so then probably 2, 3, 4, or 5 vendors, feed aggregators might be sufficient. With this second step, there comes also additional challenge, because with additional feeds, with additional sources of truth, there is no longer a single source of truth. So it means we start to try and balance, so okay, if there is conflicting information, and there is definitely conflicting information, because otherwise it would not make even sense to have different, for example, different vendors. So what is right, and when is what solution right, and so on. So kind of rules engine building approach, and how to make a single solution from conflicting information. So that's a second step. But nevertheless, so there are still gaps, because there are domains that are not known to any third-party source and so on, but nevertheless, home users are visiting those. So yes, ML/AI might help, because it helps save the world and solve all the cases. It is not like that, but ML was introduced to try and cover certain gaps. Yes, this is definitely having in mind that even the fastest third-party engines, they are still third-party, and it means to some extent they are reactive, because we rely on certain knowledge and information that is given to us. And there are lots of cases, specifically once again, 50 million gateways, households, domains that are being visited, and short-lived domains as phishing. So that's the case for ML. And yes, this might be proved to be a successful case for that particular gap closure. But what is needed to build let's say a good ML model, to train an ML model, we need data. We need data, and we need much, much more data than it comes from, let's say, from 2 billion devices, after applying certain filtering and so on. So we need much, much more data, and, start building data lakes, getting all the net flow data and so on. And now, for example, an organization is sitting on a pile of data. So for a context like this, 50 million gateways sends approximately 50 to 60 billion browsing requests each day towards cloud to get the reputation of certain domain or URL. So that's excluding all the caching layers, things that are known already, and so on. So that's how, let's say, what are the volumes of the data. So where we get that? Sitting on a network layer, we have lots of data. What we don't have is we don't have contextual data, so we get into a situation that we have too much data, and at the same time we have too little data, because we don't know about the data that we have, so we can't even, let's say, train successful ML models, because we don't know the ground of truth. So for the ground of truth, also bringing here, so on this paradox, large quantities of data sitting on a network layer and not enough contextual data. And paradox of working on a network layer at homes, at this gateway level, perimeter protection, is also that the protection or the decisions cannot be too strict. So definitely there are industries that are known to be very sensitive to false negatives, and that's better to block something unknown than to allow it. But residential homes is not such area. So one of the cases was COVID and global pandemics. So I think those who analyze the data remember that there were hundreds of thousands new domains related to COVID, corona, pandemics, and so on registered in the first days and weeks after the global pandemics was announced. So there was probably 15 to 20% of these domains that ever got any content. But we've analyzed this after, of these domains that had some content. So yes, the leading ones are regional info, global info, and news, and that's perfectly fine. We won't get into the whole fake news topic. And then there are shops and services. So what is exactly that you are, for example, selling and serving when it comes to pandemics, when it comes to global pandemics? There are charity, volunteering initiatives, and other kind of categories that is a bit of gray area. So there is one not so gray area coming from residential homes that we can clearly mark as suspicious, and this is one of the suspicious ones that is visible. So that's COVID-19 financial supports. You input your name, you input your social security number, and hoping to get, I don't know, tax reduction or tax delay or something like that. And what you get is your data is probably being sold in dark web in 60 days or something like that. So that's clear. This is a suspicious one that can safely be blocked. But what about such cases as coronavirus frequency defense, where you can buy a CD that will boost your immunity against coronavirus? So this is something, probably the case, the shop that would not stand strong against medical research, against overall scientific research, and so on. But this is a shop, this is a, let's say, business, where if a person wants to get some sounds to heal himself, to boost his or her immunity, he or she can get this purchase and get the CD delivered. And the same thing was with all the, let's say, not countless, but lots and lots of other shops where all kinds of weird things, starting from incense to ultraviolet lights to detect coronavirus and so on, so were sold. So this is the gray area that is, it kind of makes sense for people not to allow to buy this immunity boosting music, but at the same time, who are we when working in security to make this moral guidance and so on. So one thing that I'm leading here is what's allowed, let's say, for some of the industry areas to be very strict. So that's not allowed in this kind of residential homes, NSPs protection. So what are exactly the challenges in here out of these slides? So that's 3. Analysis of unbalanced data sets. So yes, that's unbalanced data set, 40,000+ different device models sending all kinds of data, users with all kinds of browsing, streaming, and so on activities. And even the fastest, let's say, third-party engine is still reactive, and ML is not suitable to solve everything, and that's definitely, I think, not a surprise. So one of the approaches that I'm listing in here is, building these blocks, what is in there for such continuous threat intel improvement. So one of the building blocks is data. So data and data sources, what to get, what to, to build and to further on improve threat intel. So after getting the data, as much of raw data, or not as much, but as much as we need, because getting the data is not the problem nowadays. So it's like, be it sitting on a network layer, working and exchanging data with partners. So that's not a problem. Sort of the problem or challenge is then, doing something with the data or making sense of data. So then the next step is beautifying that or enrichment. So trying to bring in some context to the data and try to understand basically analysis of what is in there. Then quality gates. So quality gates is that there is no single definition of what is quality when, let's say, when we're talking about households versus, versus military versus governmental sector. So what is exactly the service quality? And if we talk about NSPs, for example, so one of the measurements for service quality is the number of calls to the call centers. So the number of calls to call centers, if we are very aggressive in blocking certain things, so definitely they will increase. So it means the better the security solution works, let's say, or the more strict it is, the lower is the service quality on NSP level. And from the opposite side is the less we block, or the more we allow for end users to visit, to go anywhere, then end users will not be calling as much to call centers, and the service quality is good. So once again, one more paradox in this, but that's the definition that is very subjective. Then processing or preparing the data for partner exchange, for data to be used in operational services and so on, and populating. So populating data is sending out any kind of discoveries to exchange partners, to other NSPs or other organizations that we are working in, or any organization is working with, and so on. And then this is like 3 dots that, I don't know, it can be feedback loop to the very beginning, it can be profit, it can be sold or something like that, done with that, so that's also. Once again, this is very subjective and it comes from case by case. So I'll explain a bit more 2 of these building blocks. Data source identification, first of all, so this most important building block to gather data for let's say for internal threat intel, or also for participation in global communities, exchange networks, and so on. So there are 4 different areas. So first of all, own protection data. Own protection data is good because we might have already knowledge about the data, what is in there, if we have enough context. We might probably have all the data, definitely de-anonymized and all PIIs removed and so on, but we probably have the data. We might know what are positives, what are negatives, so true positives, false negatives, and so on, and false negatives are definitely ones that are, very complex to define and measure overall, because that's saying that we try to measure what we don't know, and this is, this is complex. Then the area of unknowns, and this is different from, let's say, from positives, from negatives, because that's the decision was made, for example, to block a certain domain where a handful of people visited in a range of 2 hours. But apart from the blocking fact, we have no other confirmation that that domain is legit or malicious. It has never appeared on any threat intel feeds, and we don't know. So this is the large portion of unknowns, where we might want to include those in further, for example, model rebuilding or something like that. And then logs, operational data, and other activities that might be useful. Then if internal data or own protection data is not enough, so definitely building additional services like scraping services, crawling services, and so on. So this is the part where we can probably cover the unknown part. So if we don't know something about the domain, we might try to crawl it, to get features extracted, to probably do some sort of screenshotting of that with one thing in mind, that this domain still needs to be alive. And with, for example, with phishing, with certain scam sites and so on, so that's the short TTL is also one of the things that does not allow to do that very effectively. And then honeynet, darknet monitoring, and all the other means that that are out there. Sort of the slowest process, but the one that might bring most benefit is research data. So allowing the researchers, threat researchers, for example, to reverse engineer malware, to look into the data, sandboxing, and model threats based on, for example, NetFlow data analysis and so on. So that's the slow process, but the sort of the fruits might be the best out there. And also free commercial sources, so including aggregators, feed, exchange data, and so on. So two things in here about the qualities. What are the data source qualities that our research need? So that's what I've covered. And also, before choosing between vendors, it must have an extensive testing on the company's organization's production data. Because no matter how good the demos or short tests are, testing of, let's say, half a year in listen-only non-blocking mode is the thing that will bring a certain benefits or understanding of what we have in there. So then quality gates, yes, so that's tolerance. Where is the line, where is the threshold for tolerance for false positives, negatives, unknowns, where do we put this line, what is quality for the certain, let's say for the certain organization, and how does quality gates affect other parts. So other parts like populating data. So maybe other vendors, our partners will benefit from the data that is of no use for us, so that's a thing to consider. So, and where does ML come in? So ML comes in where there is good contextual data or when there is context to put to data. And that's it. Otherwise, well, it's a bit, let's say, gray area because we don't really know how good and effective, let's say, that particular model is. And so, yes, so for example, from the latest ones is, due to lack of time, I will not go into details, but as phishing is a good example for ML usage, as well as Web3 scams are. So towards the end of last year, October 22, we've seen a rise of Web3 NFT scams. And these scam websites are different in nature from phishing. They don't have the features to be extracted that would, let's say, make sense adapting phishing model, but different model for different features to be extracted from Web3 scam websites is possible, and also these scam websites tend to live a bit longer and have a longer TTL than phishing. So final notes on this continuous threat intel improvements. So what's driven? So definitely context. I've used probably, I don't know, 10 to 15 times the word context, but this is what's the gist or the main important thing in here is that we need to have context on data, and that is, well, sometimes sitting on a network layer, it's, let's say, we are looking with jealousy towards antivirus solution that sit on a more abstract layers and have more knowledge about what's what. And the second one is the continuous balance of all and any in-house third-party solutions on all these variables that were listed out there. And that's it. Thank you, and glad to answer any questions.
Leonardas, actually.